In August 1914, the agricultural cycles of Congress Poland collided with the mobilization schedules of two massive empires. Local farmers rushed to gather their summer crops. They worked under martial law, rushing to bring in the grain, while advancing armies scoured the countryside, aggressively requisitioning their draft horses and livestock. The military commands marching into the region shared a singular confidence. They believed this campaign would be swift, decisive, and concluded well before winter. Staff officers had planned a conflict based on the doctrines of the previous century. They anticipated open field maneuvers and sweeping cavalry charges, heavily underestimating the realities of the weapons they now carried. The rhythm of the harvest was about to be overtaken by an industrial machine that neither side fully understood. The Austro-Hungarian strategy relied on speed. By August 21st, their First Army crossed the Danube River, launching a massive preemptive strike northward out of Galicia, aiming for Lublin. General Viktor Dankl drove this advance. His forces moved rapidly, covering up to 70 kilometers in a matter of days. Waiting to the north was the Russian Fourth Army, commanded by General Anton von Salza. The speed of the Austro-Hungarian march caught the Russian command off guard, disrupting their own concentration of forces. In the headquarters of both empires, the movements were tracked on paper maps. The neat lines and pins suggested a controlled, orderly progression of troops. The initial success of Dankl's march across the border validated their assumptions, reinforcing expectations that the conflict would follow the script written in their academies. On August 23rd, Dankl's forces crashed into the Russian lines at the town of Krasnik. The Austro-Hungarian advance was aggressive enough to blind the Russian scouts. The First Army successfully pushed the Russian left flank, forcing the infantry into a defensive scramble. The early hours of the battle looked exactly as the generals had envisioned. Hungarian Honved hussars mounted a brawling cavalry charge, swinging sabers as they drove directly into the Russian infantry positions. The shock tactics worked. The Russian lines buckled under the weight of the assault. For the Austro-Hungarian command, this successful maneuver seemingly proved their offensive doctrine was correct. But the cavalry charge at Kraśnik was an anomaly. It was a fleeting display of the old world, quickly erased by the machinery deploying on the ridges above them. The open field skirmishes were shattered by high explosive artillery. Batteries of heavy mortars and howitzers opened up with concentrated hurricane fire. The bombardment tore through the woods and leveled local villages, turning the terrain into a cratered obstacle course. Stripped of their mobility, the infantry had no choice but to dig. Soldiers frantically carved out shallow, freezing earthworks with pickaxes, trying to put even a few inches of dirt between themselves and the incoming shrapnel. The sheer volume of casualties shocked the men on the ground. Observers like combatant Jan Zions struggled to describe the slaughter using the only vocabulary they knew. He wrote in his diary that the dead were packed together across the fields, piled tightly like sheaves of wheat. The bravery of a saber charge meant nothing against the mechanized repetition of heavy artillery. The battle had devolved into an industrial slaughter. By August 25th, the guns quieted. The Austro-Hungarian army held the field. The Russian Fourth Army was in full retreat, pulling back 70 kilometers to the north, toward Lublin, abandoning their positions and leaving thousands behind. News of the victory reached Vienna, where it was celebrated as a masterclass in offensive warfare. But on the ground, the reality of the triumph was beginning to set in. In just 3 days of fighting, the Austro-Hungarian forces suffered 40,000 casualties. Gaining the territory meant they now owned the logistical burden of the battlefield. The victory was a trap, requiring resources the empire simply did not have on hand. The medical infrastructure collapsed immediately. Field hospitals were overwhelmed by the influx of shattered bodies, scrambling to load bleeding men onto rear-bound trains. On top of their own wounded, the Austrians captured 6,000 Russian prisoners. These men had to be fed, guarded, and marched backward through the exact same supply lines the army was trying to use to move forward. Then the autumn rains began. The Lublin salient dissolved. The terrain degraded into a thick, knee-deep mire that bogged down troops and made the movement of artillery nearly impossible. Draft horses foundered in the clay. Supply wagons sank to their axles. The rapid maneuvers planned by the officers were literally stuck in the mud. Kraśnik delivered a harsh verdict. It destroyed the doctrines of the past and locked the Eastern Front into a grueling war of attrition that would consume millions.